All right. Hey, everybody. Rohit Garawal here, CEO of OE. And a couple of weeks ago, I came across a really interesting paper that OpenAI, the founders of ChatGPT, put out that really talked about how AI is being implemented in the enterprise. And being that that's where I spend most of my time, I wanted to go through that paper, kind of internalize it, but then also maybe come up with some real world examples of where exactly the point that they're making can be showcased, but also I felt like it was missing some things based on what I'm seeing in the enterprise, and I wanted to add those in. So what I'm going to go through here is my take on, well, first my summarization of what OpenAI put out, which I think is for the most part spot on, and then layering in some real world examples, but also layering in certain things that I think they should have emphasized potentially a little bit more. But given that they are an AI platform company, the fact that they didn't focus in on some of the things that come pre AI shouldn't be that surprising. So to clarify, it's not so much that I'm objecting with something that OpenAI is putting out from the way that they're talking about their models. It's more that I think a little bit more attention needs to be given to context orchestration. But I'm going to get into that. All right. They started the paper by calling out the success of AI. Obviously, within the consumer space, 700 million unique monthly visitors are now using ChatGPT. The numbers in themselves are stunning, staggering, awe-inspiring. Use whatever adjective you want, and that's been well talked about. But what they're saying in the enterprise is there's some stats. I did not verify these, so let's just take OpenAI at their word that companies that are leveraging AI extensively are seeing 1.5 times faster revenue growth versus peer companies, 1.6 times higher shareholder returns, and 1.4 times better return on invested capital. Again, these are numbers put out by OpenAI. I have not validated those, but they said it's based on the analysis of 300 successful implementations. All right. The other thing that they noted is that the AI adoption is accelerating and that it's a faster than internet adoption. So I found this pretty interesting, that it's called out this way. That essentially that the percent of U.S. adults that are adopting AI is growing faster than the rate of U.S. adults when they adopted the internet. So 39% of U.S. adults have used AI in just the last 2 years versus 20% in the same time frame of the internet. The strategic implications of this, easy for you to say, is first mover advantage window is narrow, i.e., if you want to be a first mover in this space because the adoption is faster this time around and accelerating, the first mover advantage window is more narrow. The competitive differentiation is happening rapidly, employee expectations are evolving quickly, and market leaders emerging in real time. And so it is OpenAI's stand that organizations must act decisively to capture AI benefits. I agree with this, but I'm going to be putting out a different video on this in terms of what I'm actually seeing. I've been out over the last 2 weeks speaking to a number of customers and prospects, and I do think that this is actually changing a little bit, or at least there's a nuance here when it says you have to act decisively. All right, so ROI reality check 92% plan to increase AI investment. Makes sense. I have no idea why that isn't 100%. Not sure what large enterprises aren't doing something with AI. So that 8%, if that's you, give me a call. We need to talk. But only 1% have achieved AI maturity. I don't even know what AI maturity means. They didn't define this in the paper. And I don't know if AI maturity is an end state, really. I think the technology is so new and there's so many varied and unique applications of the technology within the software engineering stack that I'm not quite sure what maturity means. So when they say 1% of AI maturity, I don't know what 100% would look like or what maturity would even be. However, the root causes of this, i.e., the challenges that enterprises are facing, is that there's numerous potential use cases. There's a lack of a systematic approach to understand what those use cases are. I totally agree with that, by the way. Insufficient leadership alignment, and there's skill gaps and integration complexity. Let's also throw in there the fact that there could be, for the lack of a better word, politics. Ultimately, I think there are going to be change management issues as AI is going to fundamentally and eventually disrupt and displace human workers in organizations. And I think that is a real valid and I think a good thing that organizations slow down to think about how that works. So I think that is a major fifth one, not called out in the OpenAI report, but one that I would definitely like to share. So OpenAI put out there, and I think this is one of the most important things: 6 AI use case primitives, i.e., what's a systematic approach to identifying and scaling AI applications across enterprise functions. So what they did was they went out to 4,000. They conducted 4,000 enterprise surveys across 300 successful implementations. They didn't really quite define what a successful implementation was, but let's just leave that be for right now. Long story short, they called out 6 primitives, i.e., 6 areas at the fundamental level where they're seeing AI make a difference: content creation, research, coding, data analysis, ideation and strategy, and automation. I think these are 100% true and fundamentally mimic the way that we're seeing value in the consumer space. Human beings and content creators, uh, students, they're all using it for content creation. A lot of us use ChatGPT for research. If you're a coder, which I am, I use it to help me code and vibe code and also look at some of my code to help me improve my code. I haven't really used it for data analysis, to be quite honest, that much, but I can see how it could be used. I think you do need to have a good contextual layer to drive just valid and realistic data analysis, but I can see why that is a use case primitive. Ideation strategy, shoot, I use that every day. And then automation, we within our own company are leveraging tools like N8N, which are workflow optimization tools, to integrate AI into our workflows. I think there's something really important to note that fundamentally what many people are doing outside of these 5 of these primitives: content creation, research, coding, data analysis, and ideation strategy, are single points in time and single point help spots. I mean, that you could use agentic, i.e., if you're doing ideation strategy, have an agent go out there and do multiple threads of research for or ideation for you or research for you in that second primitive. But automation is one where AI sits in the automation workflow. It's not doing everything. So I think when OpenAI here is talking about automation, they're not talking about one AI automating an end-to-end workflow in the enterprise. They're talking about an end-to-end workflow that has AI implemented within it. So, for example, if you have a 5 step workflow and step 3 is evaluating and doing spell checking on a document, I'm just making that up. That third step could be done with AI. So, not the entire end to end workflow in that example, but maybe just that third step. So, I think that's what they're talking about automation. And I totally agree with that. And so here are some success stories. Um, Microsoft and Accenture put out there some success stories, and then we layered in one of our own. Fundamentally, I can speak to mine, where we did an automated document creation across an entire tech stack workflow for a customer of ours. The estimated savings per year are about 5 million. It took us about 6 months worth to develop, with about 2.5 members on average per month, and the success rate of the automation is about 80%. Now, what we're doing there, because 80% isn't quite good enough, is we're leveraging another AI, and this is the part that's under development right now, that it's a total end-to-end workflow. I mean, I'm talking about really, really complex, with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents. What we're doing is we're doing a evaluation agent at the end, which allows us to say, well, 60% of the documents that we're creating have 99.9% confidence that these are great, and maybe 20% have 90% confidence, and 20% have 40% confidence. And so we want the humans to really focus on that last 20 and potentially some of the next 20, but they don't have to ever look at those 60% because we have a higher confidence interval than we do that the humans doing the work. So I think this is an interesting way to start looking at large scale technology deployments that involve AI, is being able to identify where you're really good with it and where you're not, and still having humans within the organization focusing on the ones where we're not that confident, because those are usually the hardest ones and the most edge casey ones anyway. And those are the ones that people most likely enjoy working on. AstraZeneca and McKinsey use cases here. AstraZeneca put out a use case around an AI agent for drug discovery to find treatments. They found a 70% reduction in drug discovery time. Now, this is obviously not to market. This is just discovering potential new drugs. McKinsey created a platform called Lily for knowledge synthesis across 100,000 documents. They said that the time savings, 30% of time savings for over 70%, 72% of their users. And then GitHub has put out a number of different enterprise use cases here where they're saying that 55% faster task completion. Accenture is saying they had 8.69% faster pull request increase. And then there's a future processing case study where they saw 34% in new speed increases. And I think coding help is definitely where AI has created probably the most value. I don't know of any coders today that don't use some form of AI to help them and make them more effective and efficient. Walmart and PayPal put out some examples. Walmart on the retail side, they created an AI-powered supply chain inventory analysis for 10,000 of their suppliers. They said that they had 30% inventory waste reduction, 25% fewer stockout incidents, 15% supply chain cost reduction, and 15% inventory accuracy. To be clear, this is not a full production rollout. This is potential savings in their test cohort. Walmart has not achieved 15% supply chain cost reduction across their entire operations. In case anyone's making any stock bets on this is for their POC. PayPal, deep learning models for fraud detection using 200 petabytes of data. They're predicting, again, this is not rolled out in production, 11% reduction in losses, which for a company like PayPal would be huge. And they're using, like I said, over 200 petabytes worth of data. The model itself takes about 3 weeks here to fine tune on their existing data. BCG and Deloitte. BCG put out a multi-agent AI for strategic scenario modeling and brainstorming. They said that they had overall bias reduction and overcame cognitive biases and increased organizational agility in decision making. Deloitte put out a ChatGPT internally for 450,000 of their employees for research and proposal development. They're projecting $89 million of cost savings in the first year and 45% reduction in research tasks, which we said is one of those primitives that I think we see across the commercial space and across the consumer space. UPS and JP Morgan. UPS effectively reimagined a program for workflow automation. They have a multi-year target for $1 billion. They didn't go into much detail about this. JP Morgan has an LM-based contract review automation, 85% less manual reviews, 60% fewer errors, and $50 million in annual savings. I can tell you that we call our lawyers, our lawyer usage has reduced over 90% here at Object Edge. Because we put all of our initial contracts that are not high value contracts, which is the majority of the contracts that we write, whether they be POCs or extensions, pretty standard stuff. We reduced our lawyer usage by 90% by training ChatGPT on previous contracts, and it does a great job every time. All right. So then what OpenAI recommends here is a 3-step strategic process. One is that they want you to understand where AI adds value. Identify high impact opportunities by mapping repetitive tasks and skill gaps. Second, they want you to teach employees fundamental use cases. So you drive bottom-up adoption by training teams on core use cases and encouraging experimentation. This, by the way, has a side benefit of making employees feel less fearful about AI because they're integrating it part of their lives, which makes them more effective. And then 3, prioritize and scale systematically. I would say that understanding where AI can drive value is the number one issue at most companies. So OpenAI, again, put out this quadrant system of high ROI focus, scope and prioritize, self-service, and deprioritize in terms of where you're putting. No rocket science here. They're basically saying, hey, anything that has high impact and low effort, do those first. High impact, high effort, scope and prioritize them. Low impact, low effort, self-service, just that's part of that bottom up individual kind of workflow development. Anything that's low impact but high effort, just deprioritize it. There are a number of interesting ways here, actually, if you're still listening and you're still paying attention to this report, sorry, it's getting a little long. I think there's some really interesting ways here of understanding, and I put out some content before about how do you actually find the right use cases. I'm going a little off script on this, but what's really important is fundamentally understanding, is your data ready to be leveraged by AI? So there's these kind of, there's a dual pain here. Number one is I would think about this from the standpoint of a business, from business actions, or things that you want to be able to do in your business that you can say in English, ignoring technology altogether. I'll give you an example. If I said to you, I'm a manufacturer, and I want my sellers to be able to sell all my products individually, or I want them to be able to bundle them as SKUs, or sorry, bundle those SKUs into a bundle and sell the bundle. That would drive a lot of value in my organization. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable, right? I want to be able to sell my SKUs individually or as a bundle. But you'd be amazed how many people can't do that, how many companies can't do that. Why? Because maybe all those SKUs are set across multiple systems, and it's not readily available in a single source system to sell. And so they have to go and manually look up every item, and it just takes a long time. So you can do it, but it takes a long time. There could be reasons that potentially there was a number of acquisitions. And because of the acquisitions, they have different CRMs with different CRM workflows, and it gets really complicated until everything has to be manual. And so they decide, okay, well, we just can't sell them as bundles. We have to sell everything individually. Well, ultimately, then what you do is you say, as a business owner and a business leader, this is what I want to do. Ultimately, we're trying to what? Increase revenue and increase margin. One of the things they'll say is, okay, I want to be able to have all my sellers sell my SKUs individually or as a bundle. And then you'll have to go into why that's not possible. One way of doing that is by doing a deep dive and understanding what are all the blockers and then mapping out where can AI fundamentally help. But I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to notice, and I think this happens 99% of the time, that there's a engineering problem, but that engineering problem needs to be broken up into two types. There's a software engineering problem and there's a data engineering problem. And both those examples I just gave you earlier, those are data engineering problems. The software engineering problem about how can I have AI make some sort of decisions for me to make this easier, that's just in the software engineering layer. So the data engineering problem is how do I get this data all consolidated and exposed so I can create a better business workflow. So in summary, the way that I think you should find where AI can help is actually forget about AI and just say, what are the things that are going to drive the most value in your company, regardless of technology? Then decompose and figure out what are the blockers in terms of why you can't do that now, and then evaluate whether AI, for some reason, now makes that a high impact, low effort, a high impact, high effort, or a low impact, low effort problem. Because maybe before it was a high impact, high effort problem, but that effort was so high that you wouldn't have driven a return. All right, off my soapbox on that one. All right. The part that OpenAI didn't really talk about, but I think is really important, is this AI infrastructure readiness. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Palantir, these are at some level AI infrastructure companies. They're not AI companies per se, though I could, obviously Google has an AI component. Microsoft has started producing their own AI, but fundamentally, most of their products are data infrastructure and an infrastructure layer. And so, what I'd like to call everyone's attention to is that, especially like with the example I gave earlier, I think what every company should be looking at, and pretty much without exception, is having a semantic ontology layer or context engineering or context architecture or context engineering. I'm hearing lots of different names for it. But basically, fundamentally, the concept here is this, is take that example I said earlier, that I want all sellers to be able to sell my products as an individual SKU or as a bundle. Now, for those of you that have done any business engineering or data modeling, you could create these kind of business primitives of seller, of product, of bundle, of opportunity, of order. And so what you're saying here is like a seller should be able to create an opportunity in my CRM of either individual products or as bundles. And the relationship here would be seller could create an opportunity creates a product or a bundle, and then a bundle is a combination of products. And now you've got these business primitives. And what you do is you create the semantical context layer that it doesn't matter where those objects live in real time in your organization. You pull them in with data pipes, you associate them with this kind of business primitive context, and you expose those business primitive contexts to your software engineering layer that you will code around, which basically abstracts out all of the junk of your data and where it lives, it doesn't matter where it lives. So if your opportunity needs to live across multiple CRMs, or if the product lives across multiple CRMs, or maybe data warehouses or ERPs, but the bundle lives in a separate ERP, it doesn't make a difference. You just have these kind of business primitive concepts of seller, of product, of order, of opportunity, and you associate those with all the different instances across your organization. And you just expose the business primitives to a software engineering layer. Everything becomes so much easier. And so rather than having to consolidate, you abstract. Rather than taking 19 CRMs and putting it into one, you just have the 19 CRM, the data from the 19 CRMs abstracted into business primitives that are homogeneous across the 19 CRMs, and then you leverage those. And I think this is the most important thing that companies should be doing on their AI journey. So here's an example of that. You take your ERP systems, your CRM systems, your PIMs, data warehouses, whatever. You leverage ETL processes, data integration, and you create these data ontologies, a context engine, and these semantic models that get then leveraged by LLM applications, AI agents, and smart workflows. Rather than trying to connect the AI agents to all these legacy systems directly and having multiple ugly connections and data cleanups and context awareness issues, you just expose a context engine, which, by the way, I think Palantir is one of the best in the world at doing. All right. Finally, and we're coming close to here wrapping up, success factors, leadership and employee empowerment. I think leadership support here is critical, according to OpenAI, and I would agree, I should say, that top-down support is a key hallmark of successful AI deployments across the 300 they studied, and employee empowerment is equally as important, i.e. bottom-up adoption. So you need to have an organization where the leadership is bought in, that AI can make a difference, and that they're investing in their employees to be able to leverage AI so that it's a top-down and a bottom-up success rate. And what they're saying is that you see an 80 to 95% adoption rates leads to a 1.5 to 1.6 times performance advantage. Those are numbers that were put out there by OpenAI. All right, so key lessons learned across the Fortune 500 implementations. Implementation strategy, focus on change management for high ROI, like Microsoft 25 to 40% productivity gains with Copilot. High volume processes, target scale-intensive operations. Walmart cut inventory waste by 30% across 10,000 suppliers. So target those high volume processes. And develop workflow integration. Seamless integration drives adoption. So Accenture said they saw 96% first day success with GitHub Copilot by integrating it directly into their workflow because people were using GitHub Copilot or GitHub already. So GitHub Copilot was already integrated into their workflows. Looking at ROI optimization, look at workflows versus tasks. So rather than spending a lot of money on individual tasks, that should be a bottom-up approach. The larger return on investment will come from workflow optimization. Data quality is incredibly important, and that's OpenAI's take. My take is that data context is even more important because you can have great data quality, but with token limitations and context understanding limitations, the more data you have, the more you hallucinate at these AIs. So I think having a context layer is even more important than data quality. And then iterative scaling, scale from small POCs to large production deployments. Organizational factors, again, leadership's empowerment and prioritization. Be top down and bottom up, and be able to prioritize what are the most important initiatives that you want to try to improve with AI. All right. So next steps, what you can do here, according to OpenAI, immediate actions over the next 30 days, identify team pain points, launch brainstorming sessions, evaluate cloud platforms like Azure, Google, AWS, and Palantir, and secure executive sponsorships for key initiatives, strategic timelines, 1 to 3 months for teaching primitives and planning infrastructure, 4 to 12 months for deploying pilots and scaling them, and 12 to 24 months, scale the AI across the enterprise. All right, guys, that was it. Hopefully you found that useful. Sorry, that was on the long side. There was a lot of data there. The OpenAI report itself was over 30 pages, so I want to consolidate that, but also put in some examples and give you a take and some lessons learned from what we've been doing as we've been doing enterprise data engineering for almost 25 to 30 years, but enterprise AI now for about 5 years with machine learning, and enterprise AI with LLMs for almost 2 years now. So hope you found this useful. If you stuck all the way to the end, nice job. And if you have any questions, please do reach out, like and share and comment. Would love to hear more. Thank you.